This is Patrick Fischler. I've appeared on TV shows such as Mad Men, Lost, and Weeds. I actually have a real career. So what the heck am I doing on Mr. Media Radio with Bob Andelman? Somebody get my agent on the phone right now.
That wasn't very nice, Patrick. Hey, today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to novelist William Kent Krueger, author of 10, count 'em, Cork O'Connor Mysteries. The latest is Vermilion Drift. Stick around.
Hey, did you know that you can listen to the latest Mr. Media show right on your phone with the Stitcher app? Stitcher is smart radio for your smartphone. Mr. Media is on demand and on the go with Stitcher. Download Stitcher for your phone today. Get the free app at www.stitcher.com. That's STITCHER.com.
So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You know, MrMedia.com, MRmedia.com. Stop by and check it out. There are more than 600, I got to check that. It might be 700 by now. Archived celebrity interviews for your listening pleasure. The show is brought to you today by thepartyauthority.us. Planning a wedding, mitzvah, or corporate event in the New York, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania area? For any and all occasions, call the Party Authority nationwide at 1-800-DIAL-DJs. That's 1-800-342-5357, where one call does it all. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of cultural illiterates in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. Now, don't you love it when a friend recommends a book and it turns out he was right? That's how I got turned on to William Kent Krueger's new book, Vermilion Drift. A friend knew I would love a good mystery and said, read this. Now, I won't lie, it took me a little while to cotton to the gentle pacing and subtleties of Krueger's book. There's no real wham-bam action, although there is some menacing behavior. So I read it a little at a time until I was halfway through. All at once, I just sort of got it, if you know what I mean, and I couldn't put it down until the end. Okay, I did pause long enough to invite the author to be a guest on Mr. Media, but you know what I mean. Now, when I was done, I learned this is actually the 10th in a series of mysteries featuring Krueger's quiet, thoughtful hero, Cork O'Connor. Now, that surprised me only in that I didn't feel like I was jumping on a moving train when I started the book. And now I want to go back and start the series from the beginning. William Kent Krueger, welcome to Mr. Media.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, Bob.
Thanks for being with us. And I'm told that I should address you as Kent, not William.
Yeah, that's what anybody who knows me well calls me. If I get a telephone call and somebody asks to speak to William or Bill, I know they're trying to sell me something.
That's a good trick. But I'm afraid if more people start calling me and saying, "Hey, jackass," I'm not going to know.
Well, so far that hasn't been a problem for me, but we'll have to see about that.
Okay. Well, look, I hope it didn't insult you that it took me a while to get into the rhythm of your storytelling.
No, and in fact, when I was creating this story, that was a concern that I had. Truthfully, if you had read the earlier works, there's a lot of action, a lot of visceral suspense involved in the series, but this was going to be a different book, I understood, and so my concern was, am I going to be able, just with the quality of the writing and the characters themselves, to compel them to move forward? In the end, I think I did a pretty good job.
I would agree. So, but that's interesting. See, now, I didn't know that much about the other books, having only read this one. So there is more action in the other books. I just figured it was kind of, this was kind of like those. That's interesting.
Well, every book, I think every author that I read, one of the reasons I read them is that each book is different. They're not all cut from the same cloth. So I try to do the same things with my books. Sometimes the books are just about action and suspense. A good example of that would be the second book in the series, Boundary Waters, which I conceived sort of like, if you know the movie Speed, I conceived Boundary Waters to be sort of Speed with canoes. So I do different things with all of the books.
I apologize.
This one just happened to be one of the quieter developments in terms of the stories that I've told.
Okay, folks, just in case I laughed over that, the man said speed with canoes. Okay, that's what I was laughing at. It's funny. I'm sorry. That's a very funny description. Now I want to go read it, though.
Good. That's exactly what I hope happens.
Now I am interested. I mean, I do read a lot. Part of it is doing a show like this, and part of it is I've always read a lot. But over the years when I've read series, part of the reason I think you go back to a series is because there's a character that you grow fond of, and I hate to say it, but it's somewhat predictable. Like Clive Cussler's Dirk Pitt. You pretty much know how that's going to go from book to book. Or, James Bond, or I'm trying to think of another example where there's a certain quotient of action, there's a certain quotient of sex. There's, with the Bond stuff, there's, not so much in the books, I guess, as the gadgety stuff. But you're saying that you set out to make each book very different, and that's, that in itself is kind of different, I think, in this genre.
Well, there are people who read a particular series because they know what to expect, and they like that comfort level of an author giving them exactly what he's given them before and will give them again. That interests me not at all. What I have always tried to offer the reader is it's like a new wine each time. It's all made from grapes, but the things that make each of those offerings special, the subtleties, the nuances, change from book to book to book. Some of the things that are going to be the same in each of the series, for example, would be the character Cork O'Connor, who stands solidly at the center of the stories. Some of the characters that surround them, the recurring characters, the setting itself, which is a profound influence on each of the stories. But the stories themselves and the themes that I deal with certainly do change book to book.
Well, let's sort of go back to the beginning a little bit. For folks like myself who may be jumping on late, tell us a little bit about the origins of Cork O'Connor, and where was he in his career when the reader first meets him?
The Cork O'Connor, for those who don't know the series, is a guy who lives in northern Minnesota. He lives in the wilderness area of northern Minnesota in a small town called Aurora there, in a fictional county called Tamarack. Cork is the former sheriff of the fictional Tamarack County, and he's a man of mixed heritage. He's part Irish and he's part Ojibwe. Because of that mixed heritage, and largely because of the location I've chosen to set this, in which I've chosen to set the series, I deal very often in my stories with issues that rise out of the interface of those two cultures, white and Ojibwe. I've written books about Indian gaming casinos and the effect that has on both the Ojibwe community and the surrounding white communities. I've dealt with conflict over the cutting of sacred pines. Always at some level in the books there's going to be discussion of racial prejudice, which is an ongoing concern, certainly among the Ojibwe. Cork O'Connor came about really because of an idea I had for a protagonist before I even thought I was going to write a mystery series. I conceived of a guy who was, in my mind, so resilient that no matter how far life pushed him down, he would always bob back to the surface. And his name, of course, was going to be Cork. That nugget of an idea morphed into the full character of Cork O'Connor. When the reader is introduced to him in that first book, Iron Lake, the first book of the series, Cork's life is in a meltdown. He's lost his job as sheriff. He's on the cusp of losing his family. He's lost his self-respect. He's in this real midlife crisis meltdown, and he's trying to find his way back to the surface.
Hey, tell me how important it is that his name is Cork. I mean, I mentioned Clive Cussler before, and I think of Dirk Pitt. We talked about James Bond, or I talked about James Bond. Cork, I mean, it's a great name.
Hey, thanks. Again, I knew the name and I knew the kind of guy he was. They kind of both went together long before I did the series. But when I decided to make this guy Irish and Ojibwe, Cork morphed very naturally into Corcoran O'Connor. And Cork O'Connor was kind of a catchy name. So I don't know, maybe it was delivered to me by God or something. I don't know.
And tell me about the Ojibwe influence. His name is clearly Irish, but he thinks, I've never been one, but he thinks, as I guess many people would expect, maybe a very smart Native American would think.
Do you know, he is a guy who is never quite white enough for the whites and never quite Ojibwe enough for the Ojibwe. And his thinking kind of goes back, and his loyalties kind of go back and forth between those two cultures. He has a guy in the series, an old Mide, for want of a better word, a medicine man, who gives him advice in those periods, those times in his life when he kind of is all knotted up and can't untangle the knots. This guy, Henry Malou, gives him the guidance that helps him untie the knots. So he receives a lot of advice from the Ojibwe side of him, and he's always kind of struggling to figure out where the white side plays in. When we talk about trying to keep a series fresh, trying not to have a predictable story, that's one of the things that keeps it fresh for me. Is I'm never quite sure how Cork is going to unravel these things, these knots that he gets himself into.
Now, Henry is interesting because he doesn't just give Cork the answers, although we suspect as we read along that he has the answers. He seems to know everything. Why not just give Cork the answers he's seeking? Because it would be a short book.
What would be the fun in that? Part of the fun is watching how Cork figures out the clues that Malou gives him, and that's part of the journey that Malou continues to send him on. It's all discovery, and if Malou gave him the answers, what would be left to discover? And in what Malou delivers to him, there's always the possibility for Cork to discover more about himself.
But there's also the opportunity for him to think, Henry's a little suspicious here. As a reader sometimes has to think. It's like, this guy Henry, maybe he's got something to hide.
Well, and the other opportunity it gives me is for Cork to make the wrong decision. Cork interprets things incorrectly sometimes and comes to a dead end and figures, well, I guess this wasn't what Malou meant, and has to back up and start again. He's not a flawless character by any sense, in any sense of the word. And that's, again, one of the things I like about him. And one of the responses I get from readers is that they love the fact that Cork's a regular guy. He doesn't always make the right decisions.
Well, yeah, he's a regular guy with one exception. I want to be careful how I say this. I kept wondering when your hero was gonna get some, if you know what I'm saying.
I very often get emails from guys that go something like this: "Dear Kent, I love your work, man. I love your stories, but you need to put more sex into them." In fact, as a result of Vermilion Drift, I had a woman write to me to say something like this: I love Cork O'Connor, but it's clear to me this guy needs to get some.
See?
We'll see.
Okay, so
we'll see. I have lots of books ahead of me in this series, and I've always wanted, as a writer, to face the challenge of writing a really good, tasteful sex scene. So we'll see.
Well, look, let me give you permission. If you write a really good, tasteful sex scene, go ahead and write another one. It's okay.
All right.
But yeah, we are almost trained these days to expect that there's going to be some heavy flirting, that there's going to be some sex in these books, and I think that's I got to the end. I was a little surprised that there was. I'm sorry if I'm giving this away, but that there wasn't any. But at the same time, I didn't feel like. I mean, it didn't affect the story one way or the other.
Yeah, Bob, if you had followed the series and you knew where Cork was in his life, you'd understand why in this particular book there wouldn't be any sex. It would just be really inappropriate and disrespectful considering what's gone on, particularly in the book before this one. So I purposely chose to have nothing suggestive in that way whatsoever. But that said, the whole future is wide open for Cork.
Well, I do understand. Having read the book, things happen with his wife that have really upset and hurt him, and he's his kids are away from him. But I was just curious.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Because you're right. When your initial comments were that's often one of the things that readers come to genre novels for is, hey, good action and great sex. Well, sometimes they're going to find that in my work, and sometimes they're not. I hope they always find great, compelling characters and a great, compelling story. That's far more important to me.
There you go. Well, Ken, let's take a quick break. This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to the Mr. Media radio interview with novelist William Kent Krueger, whose 10th Cork O'Connor mystery is Vermilion Drift. And we will be right back.
Ever thought of hosting your own radio show? Now you can by registering at blogtalkradio.com. While you're there, check out our selection of premium packages. To start your own show today, visit blogtalkradio.com.
This is a public service message from the National Lampoon Radio Hour.
Don't waste your evenings doing volunteer work at your local mental hospital. Remember, even if you do, the crazy people there will probably think you didn't.
Someone keeps slipping that in. This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to the Mr. Media radio interview with novelist William Kent Krueger, whose 10th Cork O'Connor mystery is Vermilion Drift. We talked about this briefly, but one of the unique aspects of Cork's life and work is that the Native American or Indian reservation is central to it in Minnesota. How important is that? And could Cork relocate and have the same impact if he was in Albuquerque or Portland?
I think that at this point, if I tried to relocate Cork, readers would probably shoot me. And one of the reasons I think that readers come to the work is the sense of that particular place, the beautiful northern Minnesota, that wilderness, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area wilderness that I've given them. When I teach writing, I always teach setting or place before I teach character, because I contend that character grows out of place. Character is shaped so significantly by place that it's difficult to separate the two. Cork, in large measure, is the kind of guy he is because of where he was born and grew up, and the cultural influences of that particular place. So I think it would probably be very hard to transplant him and maintain the same level of character and interaction and story that I've been able to with this series.
Now, you said that readers would revolt if you relocated him. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, do you have a sense of? Do you have a particularly heavy readership of Native Americans or Minnesotans, or is it people who are outside of that area who have just grown so fond of this tapestry that you've woven?
Do you know, I think you just nailed it with that last comment, Bob. I get a lot of readers probably the vast majority of my readers, have never been to Minnesota. But the response I get from them is that they so enjoy being brought to this place with my work, being sunk so deeply into sense of place that they feel like they know it, like they've been here. That's one of the reasons I choose the books I choose to read. I love James Lee Burke. I've never been to New Orleans, never been to New Iberia, but I love this series because when I'm reading it, I can hear the Cajun in the voices, I can smell that fetid swamp, I can taste the dirty rice, and I hope that's the kind of experience I deliver to my readers.
It's fun. I was just, as you were thinking of that, I was thinking of another writer who's on the imprint that you are, Richard Deutsch, and he was on the show a few weeks ago, and I was complimenting him on his descriptions of I think it was Turkey, and I was saying, how much time do you have to spend in these places? And he said, "Oh, I've never been there." Yeah. I'm like, huh? Wait a minute, I feel like I've been there, So, yeah, I mean, that's the power of a book. It transports you to a place. Now, it's a little disappointing to find out that the author's never been there either, but,
Well, that points out the power of a good author. A good author can, I suppose, visit a place on the Internet and sink him or herself into the imagining of it so significantly that they're able to create a sense of place. My own belief is that for my own writing, at any rate, I have to go to the places that I write about. I have to be there in the season in which the story is set, so I know what the colors are, and what the temperatures are, and what the smells are, and what people are talking about in that season. And I think for me, at any rate, that's how I'm able to capture a particular place so particularly well, I hope.
Let's talk about the title for a minute. Vermilions, it's a wonderful word. It really creates a mental picture. But drift has a very geological meaning that I wonder if you would take a moment and explain that to folks.
Sure. And then I'll explain why I like that title a lot.
Okay.
Adrift. Okay, the novel has, as a part of the storytelling, the texture of the story, my iron mining up in the north. And iron mining was done in two ways up on the Iron Range. It was done with open pit mining, but earlier it was done with underground iron mining. And when you dig an underground iron mine, when you excavate a vertical shaft, it's called a sink. When you dig a horizontal tunnel off that shaft, it's called a drift. Vermilion drift. Okay, so we're talking about a particular tunnel in an underground mine, the Vermilion Drift. One of the things I like about that title is that the word itself, vermilion, is just such a beautiful word. And when you add that drift on it, it has both a specific geologic meaning, that tunnel, but it also, for me, really describes where Quark is in his life. He's adrift. And when that title came to me, I thought, this is so perfect.
Very good. And then, I wanted to ask you a broader question. As writers, whether fiction or nonfiction, we're all kind of influenced by other storytellers. And I was curious about who had an impact on you, either in terms of the things that you do or the things that you don't do.
Within the genre itself, I would say Tony Hillerman, of course, has had a huge influence on me, and any other writer who has a profound sense of place and uses a culture that's not mainstream American. So certainly Tony Hillerman, James Lee Burke, whose work just makes my teeth ache. His writing is so good. Dennis Lehane, I just love how I love how this guy is like a literary machine gun, and I love that. So there are some influences right there outside the genre, of course. Okay, here we get really highfalutin, but I love Steinbeck. I love how he was able to create a sense of place, a powerful sense of place. I loved Hemingway with just the whole style that he brought to the work that we do. When I'm reading outside the genre these days, I'm much influenced by other Midwestern authors. I think there's an identifiable Midwest voice that's very spare but elegant and rises out of a profound sense of connection with the land. So all of that's had an influence on me.
I think you mentioned earlier that you teach writing. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Where do you teach?
I know teach writing.
Yeah. Well, you're saying writing doesn't pay enough?
Well, when you become known as a writer, particularly if you, in my case, known as a writer of the genre, I'm very often asked to teach the writing of the genre in venues where it's not a real common thing. So I have taught a class for the University of Minnesota in writing mysteries. We have a great center here for the written word in the Twin Cities called The Loft. It's the largest independent center devoted to the written word in the United States, and I teach mystery, on occasion, mystery writing for them. I've taught for Ball State and for the University of Wisconsin, and a number of other conferences have asked me to contribute. So I don't do it all the time, because to be a good teacher takes an enormous amount of time and energy. And to be truthful, I would rather be writing.
And so I got to ask you this. What is the single most common mistake that the wannabes who take your classes make over and over again?
They walk right in believing that somehow they are going to learn in my class how to write how to write a best-selling novel. I'm going to teach them how to be rich and famous. And the first thing I try to do is to let them know that if that's why you're writing, you're going to be disappointed. But if you come to my class because writing is what you love to do, and you want to just get better at it, and the journey is what's important, then you're not going to be disappointed, because what you're going to be doing is spending your time doing what you love,
Mm-hmm. I know exactly what you're saying. I make my living as a co-author, usually on the nonfiction side, and I always start the conversation by saying, now, if you're doing this for a business purpose, or you're doing this for family purpose, or you're doing this for some secondary purpose, good. If you're doing this to get rich, we should probably stop right now, because, it doesn't work that way. Hopefully you write a book and it comes out well and you make a big impression and it all works out, but the reality is there's an awful lot of people out there writing books.
And, Bob, the thing that I run into a lot when I am involved in writers' conferences is listening to new writers complain because they haven't hit the bestseller list yet. Like, out of the starting blocks, my publisher's not doing enough for me. I don't know. Sales aren't there, et cetera, et cetera. And I just want to slap them and say, my God, do you know how many people would love to be in your shoes right now with a published novel out there? Enjoy this ride, for God's sake.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm completely with you on this, Ken. Well, look, before we have to let you go, when is the next book? I'm sure you've got something scheduled somehow.
Yeah, I'm just about to finish the first draft of the next in the Cork O'Connor series. It's called Northwest Angle, and I tell you, I'm having such a good time writing this book. We talked about Vermilion Drift that has a fairly slow, a laconic, or a lackadaisical, lazy setup. There we go. It's nice, gentle, slow-moving setup. Vermilion Drift, or Northwest Angle, right away, we're into the heart of things right at the beginning of that book, and hopefully that pace doesn't stop until the end. So it's a very different kind of book again.
Very cool. And do you have a pub date on that?
It would, provided I meet deadline. It should be out about this time next year, so it'll probably be a September release for next year.
Okay. Well, you count on an invitation to come back. So I have, we'll find out if I've caught up or at least keeping up.
I would love to talk to you again, Bob. Thank you.
That would be good. And folks, listen, you can find novelist William Kent Kruger's latest Cork O'Connor mystery, Vermilion Drift, as well as the 9 that preceded it in the series, at great bookstores everywhere, or you can order them right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. Kent, are you on Facebook or Twitter? Can people find you in those places?
I'm on Facebook. I don't tweet at the moment.
Probably a better use of your time to be at the keyboard than to be doing that. A lesson I could learn myself. William Kent Kruger, who I will now call Kent, thanks so much for joining us in Mr. Media today.
It's been a pleasure, Bob. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You too.
And folks, for more original interviews with your favorite novelists, you can surf over to our main website, mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. And please take advantage of this great offer for Mr. Media radio listeners. Speaking of books, go to audiblepodcast.com/mrmedia to get a free audiobook download of your choice when you sign up today. Again, that's audiblepodcast.com/mrmedia for your free audiobook. Subscribe to Mr. Media on iTunes and you'll never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews from within iTunes and subscribe for free. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest or just want to drop us a line, you can email me directly. That's bob@mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. And you can follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, twitter.com/Andelman, or on Facebook, just search Mr. Media Interviews. It's a great way to keep up with the upcoming interviews and also the most recently finished ones. Thanks so much for joining me today. Always appreciate it when you give a piece of your day and come spend it with us. Thanks for listening.